Do not settle for the crumbs. You should have the whole cake, the icing, and the cherry on top too.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Crumbs. It is episode 17. Yes, the followers have asked us to come back. We had such a great reception to episode 16 that we're back in business here in the studio. Jordan is with me. How are you, Jordan?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm really well. And this week we've got a special guest. I think you just termed him Mr. Chat himself, and I love that. We've got Steve Pallas with us. Steve, how are you?
Simone, Jordan, I'm a little bit nervous, to be brutally honest. No idea where we're going with this.
I don't think we do today, actually. We're taking a different approach to the Crumbs this week. And I love this idea because usually, Jordan, as you know, we come in, we've got a bit of a run sheet. We've got a presentation for the screen. We've got a number of topics that we want to throw around and really focus on. But today we are not doing that. Today we're here just to chat. And we're going to see organically where that takes us. But of course, we're talking women's sport and the discussion today around sort of where things are sitting, how we're feeling about women's sport overall and what the future may hold. And it's cool today. We've got we're going to start off with a bit of footy discussion. We've got three pretty big footy followers in the room. I'm a Hawks supporter. I've been a Hawthorn. Actually, there is a story here. I'll kick it off with a story. I was living around the corner from RSEA Park when Hawthorn did not have an AFLW team. I really wanted to get behind the league, so I went out and bought myself an AFLW membership for St Kilda, which at the time felt a little difficult to do because I am not a St Kilda supporter at all. However, I bought one to support them, and I was at their first RSEA Park home game where it was a lockout. I think I was the last person in, and they shut the doors behind me. And an amazing, amazing day. And I still tell the story of walking down the street from my house with supporters, parents and their little girls and little boys wearing the colours of their teams, and kicking a footy and really excited to go. And I think ever since the growth and support of the women's game from an AFL point of view has been pretty astounding. Whether that matches up to what else is happening in AFLW and across the sport, we're going to discuss that today. But Jordan, you're a big St Kilda fan. Tell us about your following of AFLW in particular and how you've grown to love it over the last few years.
Yeah, so like you said, big St Kilda fan, and then upon our inception, I was like, I've got to get the membership. I've got to support the girls because it's footy, and I love footy, absolutely love footy. And I thought that, AFLW wasn't separate to AFL men's. It was just part of footy, and for that reason, I decided to get behind the girls. Attended, I think, just about every home game in the inaugural season. Attended 3 or 4 games each year since then. And I just find it really thrilling to watch, especially down at RSEA Park where there's so many activations. I think we spoke about the Ferris wheel between us. That's really like a really interesting way to get kids down, and even parents who go on the Ferris wheel with the kids. I've been on it myself. It provides a pretty good view of the oval, and you get to stay up there for a couple of minutes, watch the game. But yeah, I think everything around AFLW is really just entertaining. It really feels engaging and involving upon the audience and the members there. And I really love that aspect of footy that sometimes you don't get at AFL men's. And that's the reason why I keep going down each year.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it is a real, when you go to those local games, RSEA Park's a great example of that. And I've been to some Hawthorn games down at Frankston as well. And there's that real community feel. And Steve, I'm going to bring you in on this conversation because we were talking off air about the importance of that community nature of sport, not just AFL. But in this case, obviously, we're talking about footy. But talk to us a little bit about your perspective. And I want to preface this whole discussion. You are the father of 3 daughters.
Yes, father of 3 daughters, and I guess the uncle of a footballer that got drafted to Sydney. So she made her debut a couple of years ago at Port Adelaide. She's delisted now, primarily due to injury, it looks like. So yeah, been to a fair few AFLW games myself, and love the community atmosphere. You can't take a Ferris wheel to the MCG. I mean, you can, but it's outside the game. Like all the activations at the MCG on match day are a little bit lame, but when you put those same activations into a community, Casey Fields, Frankston, RCA Park, and it just creates a carnival atmosphere, which I think is really important for the women's game to connect with this generation, the next generation, or the mums and the children. And I'm glad you said the boys, because I don't think it's a gender crowd. I think it's really important that it just captures the hearts and minds of the locals, and then we start to hand that over from generation to generation. So I think that's an important step in football, is to stay out in the communities and build that tribal following, which is what the men's side of it did for 120 years, which I think women's sport will be able to accelerate that a lot quicker. But I don't think we should go too fast through that step, because I think that's where the tribal followings come from.
Yeah, it's a really great perspective, and it's an important one. We've been out in the community though, and this is a discussion I'm keen to have with both of you this morning. We've been in the community. We're going into season 7, so in 111 days, season 10 will commence. So we're celebrating the 10th year of women's footy. There's no doubt that there's been growth. There's been growth in various aspects, and I think over the last 2 or 3 years post-COVID, certainly commercial sponsorship opportunities, obviously players through the most recent CBA and that linkage through the AFL and the AFLPA, the players are getting paid more. It's become more professional. It's less of a semi-professional sport, although I know it's not necessarily where the players or the game want it to be. But we've been out in the community, Steve, and attendance is low. Attendance is nowhere near where it needs to be from an AFLW commercial standpoint. And the viewership on Channel 7 or Foxtel, KO, wherever you're watching, hasn't been great either. Now, what do we do about it? Are we worried about it?
Oh, I think that's just a perspective and context thing, because if you're comparing the attendance to regatta rowing or fencing or athletics pre-gout or hockey, then those crowds are extraordinary, right? So the first thing is, potentially we've got to stop comparing it to the like for like, which is perceived to be men's football, and start to compare it to a 10-year product. So if you think about it, a 10-year, if a mother takes their baby daughter to the first game 10 years ago, they're only 10, right? So they're only 10, and have they formed a behaviour? There's not a second generation coming through yet, et cetera, et cetera. So again, remember, that tribalism took the men's side of it 100-odd years before we moved out of the suburbs and centralised into three or four major ovals and stadiums that we do today. So that tribalism, I think, is really, really important. And I think part of it is that we let the community and the love affair catch up with the commercial side, and don't rush that, because I think you rush it at your detriment, to be honest. But I think, in all honesty, cricket would kill for those figures by and large. Sheffield Shield cricket would kill for those figures. For many years, pre-Larry Kesselman, men's basketball would have killed for those figures in the NBL. So those figures are only less than expectation when you compare it to something that's been going for 140 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I was comparing to figures from 10 years ago, and I think obviously the league came out and there was great excitement because this never existed before. So, of course, straight away we're seeing people go, well, this is new, I'm going to go to it. And potentially at that point, the product wasn't necessarily where people wanted it to be or thought it needed to be. So that initial excitement quickly turned to, well, I didn't like that. I went and saw it and that was cool, but now I'm not going to watch it. Is that how you feel, Jordan? I mean, you were there watching and you're a lot younger than Steve and I. So your perspective would be an interesting one.
Yeah, I like you just said, I was completely agreeing and nodding my head along to you that whole time, because I believe that that's exactly what has occurred. I was looking at it earlier, and over the past 3 or 4 so years, attendance has been significantly lower than the first 3 or 4 years. And I think it was that buzz of, AFLW has just come into the competition, like it's a new thing. We're getting to see women play the sport that we know and love, and it's amazing. It's the first game, for example, had 24,000 people there, which is insane numbers for an AFLW game. Like, now they wouldn't dream about it. Now the grand final had 11,000 people at the last season, and I think it was because of that initial buzz. And what I've had as a belief over the past 4 or 5 years was that the recruitment early doors in AFLW wasn't the standard that it should have been, and the standard that's sort of getting to now. Something that we can discuss later if we're still speaking about this is that in the first 3 or 4 years, I believe that, and it is a common belief, I think that the recruitment was more centred around athletes rather than AFLW players. And that's something that we discussed with Sophia a couple of weeks ago. And I feel like that's where we sort of saw the quality of the game not be where we thought it was or where we thought it should have been. And that might have caused, obviously I don't know if it is the cause, but it might have caused the downfall of the attendance. And only recently we're seeing that uptake in the girls that are able to play footy rather than the girls that can run, the girls that can jump. And I think it's important that we keep going down that path if we want to see the quality of the game improve. And just like basically anything else in the world, if the quality improves, then the attendance will improve.
Yeah. Steve, I was at the MCG last year. There was an issue with fixturing. The Bulldogs had a game scheduled at the Whitten Oval at, I think, 5:30 for their W team, and their men were playing the Mighty Hawks AFLW team in a final at the G that night. So the league came together with the AFL, or AFLW and AFL came together, and they rescheduled that Bulldogs W game against Port Adelaide to be played at the MCG. I happened to be going to the other game, so I went a bit early. The level of skill was poor, quite poor. It was not a great display of footy, and I know the Bulldogs were struggling last year with their W program. And they'd lost Ellie Blackburn, and they were having a lot of struggles and challenges. But there's this discussion that continues about women getting to play at the MCG, getting to play at Marvel, getting to play at the big stadiums. But it's not that simple, is it?
I mean, it can be, but I like the fact that AFL haven't used the women as the prelude to the men's game, because all that does is bring the men's crowd to a women's game. It doesn't create passionate supporters for women. So separating them and then forcing the clubs into the grind of building your supporter base one at a time it's the only way to survive. And again, my thoughts with AFLW, it's less of a gender discussion and more of a product maturity discussion. But again, if we look at, and I'm not the biggest fan of the quality is a great determinant either, because Melbourne Storm has been the best team in rugby league men's for 22 years, give or take, the odd salary cap problem. And so they're high quality, and it took them a long time to build that following. And yet today, their match day experience for me is the most incredible match day experience of any club that doesn't have a Ferris wheel, Jordan. I think the Ferris wheel is an important part of match day experience, particularly if you're trying to get kids and stuff like that. So, I think the problem with going to the big stadiums is it's not a build it and they will come. You have to take it to the people and almost bring the people in one at a time, capture their hearts and minds one at a time. And it won't necessarily be through the quality of the sport, regardless of how good or perceived poor it is. NBL in the basketball is another example of where the best basketball competition, kind of pre-Larry's time, wasn't getting 2,000-3,000 people in, and that was perceived to be very poor. Built up the scenario with match day experience. And, you know, I've got a focus group of 3 daughters, and so my youngest one is, fair to say, anti-netball, but she will go to the netball because the match day experience, you know, the chance to get free stuff, get her face on the TV, which for some reason she values, and pretty much every week she gets free stuff and gets her name on the TV, and that's why she comes back. Now she knows about the netballers, she knows the names, and against her will, she's invested, so to speak. So I don't think that any developing sport should rush to the marquee venue, because it's very difficult to create great experiences in those if you're empty. And again, I keep using men's examples, like the recent Sheffield Shield where they had 6,000 spectators, 6, 7, 8,000 at Cameron Nova in Adelaide. If you put that in the Adelaide Oval, that's a terrible experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we've got to be focusing on is the match day experience. And yes, the quality of the football is part of it, but what else?
Yeah. What's
going to bring the people through the gate? What's going to bring them back through the gate? What's going to convince them to buy a badge, and it could be the fact that the girls after the game, or the players, depending on the sport, spend 2 hours signing autographs after the game. And then you got that connection. So I think rushing to the big venues is a real flaw, but I also think focusing 100% on the quality is also missing what a lot of us go to the game for. So again, just my thoughts though.
There's a couple of things I want to dissect from that. The first one is I was at the first day night test that the women played as part of the Ashes in January it was, and I'd been super excited for 6 months. As soon as tickets came out, I bought one, and I went, and I was so disappointed. There was no one there. I didn't even look at the attendance figures, and I try not to with some of those things because often they inflate them and suggest they are what they weren't. But the experience, and it's the G, so you love going to the G. So part of it was, okay, I'm at the G, and the cricket was great, and we whitewashed the Poms, which is always a good experience. But the actual experience as a spectator was pretty horrible. There was no one there, and it just looked empty. There was no atmosphere. There was no noise. You could hear people talking, and I don't know, it was disappointing. But then on the flip side of that, in 2022, I was at the Marvel Stadium Essendon Hawthorn AFLW game, and they sectioned off Marvel. I think they sold 20,000 tickets, so there was a decent crowd, and it was a great atmosphere because they had us all in sections together. And at the time, I thought, what if they had a Marvel AFLW day where they had 3 matches in a day, and that would bring in the female crowd. Like when I say female crowd, not all females, but followers of women's football would come in. It wouldn't necessarily be just men's. You know, you were saying if they're double headers, the men's supporters often come. But I wondered what that might look like, and if that's an opportunity maybe once or twice a season to give the girls that opportunity to play at a bigger venue, and obviously the AFL venue, Marvel. But what do you guys think about that?
I'll go first, Jordan. I think the ability to create what it will look like is really important. So go back to the Women's World Cup one-day final when they had 80-odd thousand in the crowd. But there's a couple of things that led up to that. There was a conscious decision. We're going to try and get the world record for the biggest crowd in women's sport. So that came with investment. So again, this concept of build it and they will come. I mean, I would challenge your point. If you put 3 crowds, 3 team or 3 matches together, that'll bring a big crowd, because will it? but it will if there's a conscious strategy and a conscious focus and some investment. And I think that then, you can't become what you can't see. So you're creating that artificially what you want to become. So I think that's a really, really important. And women's cricket in the World Cup, you created what they want to become, but that only came with investment, Katy Perry, and a lot of other things, but massive marketing underneath it that created a momentum that it was almost the place to be, and so I think that's really, really important, but it should only be when it's right in the journey, because otherwise, imagine that. And again, you can't be critical of people having a crack and going, oh, the crowd didn't come. We thought they were going to come. So you go, okay, great idea, execution didn't work, but doesn't make the idea, Paul. But imagine that day-night crowd at the Junction Oval, end of summer, you put your Ferris wheel or the equivalent, you've got your activations that are part of the day. All of a sudden, you've got this iconic first day-night test in an atmosphere that it deserved. And because we rush to these big venues, we detract from the experience, and we actually... It makes it hard for people that are sitting on the fence to go, well, I'm going to go back to that. Whereas if it was at the Junction, under lights, then they may have.
100%.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think that, there's no reason for the theory that having a bigger venue creates a better experience. Because, like I mentioned to you off air before, I went to 3 games in one day. I think it was round 5 of last season. Started at Swinburne, went to RSCA Park, and then went to the new Whitten Oval, where Western Bulldogs played Sydney. And like you mentioned earlier, Western Bulldogs didn't have a great year last year. They lost Ellie Blackburn. They didn't really have that driving star player, and they really struggled. But ending the day at that game, I was with a couple of mates of mine, same age as me, male, and we had an amazing time. Like, being at the Whitten Oval, to see the renovations that have happened to it firsthand, it looks amazing, the Oval, first of all. And like you mentioned earlier with, maybe it has to happen where AFLW players stick around and sign autographs, sign footies, whatever. That did happen that night. And after the game, the Western Bulldogs the players, they went off to a sectioned area behind cones and tape. And Ellie Blackburn was there. She was on her little mobility scooter signing autographs. And none of my mates and I are Western Bulldogs fans. But from that day, we created that experience, and that's something that has stuck with me since. I think I've got a footy at home sitting on my shelf signed by a couple of Western Bulldogs players that I don't support. I'm a St Kilda fan through and through. But that night was amazing. And we got to have real conversations with the players. We got to have engaging experiences. And that's the sort of thing that creates communities and creates fans, members, not playing at the MCG. We might have 5,000 people in a stadium that fits 100,000. But playing at Whitten Oval, even if there's only 2,000-3,000 people there, creating that atmosphere, that experience, that's going to draw people back. And it's going to draw me back, I know for sure. So I think that's the most important thing.
And you go back in history of the men's suburban football structure, some iconic, you're St Kilda supporter, so the St Kilda Disco was iconic, North Melbourne's, Richmond's, but it also, what those opportunities did was create that connection between the player and the fan.
Yeah.
That tribalism support that gets handed down from generation to generation to generation. And this is my point, I guess, with women's sport in the main, and the Matildas have done it. They just got to go through the grind, win the hearts and minds, one spectator, one fan at a time, one connection at a time. Because if we miss that step, then it's not a bond. It's a following, and following's just, it's a trend, and then we just go to the next trend. But the Matildas have done it incredibly well. Like, their grind was a little bit different. Players didn't do it through the A-League. They did it in different clubs around England and Europe and America. But then when they came together, that was quality of performance in the biggest stage in the world. And Australians, we prove every Olympics that we love to jump on the bandwagon, and the Matildas, but that came from the grind of, playing to empty stadiums and playing on the worst pitches with no facilities and connecting with people. So I think it's, those crowds that you talked about earlier, Simone, I think they're really a good foundation to which to grow. And the challenge is you've got the men's game and the men's television rights exploding. What will happen with the women's side of that, and then what flows on to the sponsors. But the commercial side of sport, forget the sports, forget the gender, forget the age group. The commercial side of sport is only valued by the number of people engaging with it and whose behaviour will be changed by following it. And the classic example at the moment is athletics. You couldn't give it away as a commercial sponsorship property 2 years ago. Now we've got two men that are running at the 10-second barrier, which is unheard of for Australians, and we've got a team of women middle distance runners and field athletes particularly that are going to be really powerful going into 2028. So now the Stall Gift has got the biggest crowd it's ever had. Channel 7, for the first time in a long time, televised the national championships last weekend. So that's, again, that's all about eyeballs and followings and the commercial reality of the sport compared to the entitlement of players, etc.
As you were talking about that, I started thinking about the Matildas. And the Matildas' effect is there's been reports, there's been shows on TV, and the numbers are there. What's it done to the Socceroos? Because if you talk about the Matildas and the impact that World Cup in particular had from a nation, I couldn't tell you who plays for the Socceroos at the moment. I don't know where they're playing. I did see something randomly. And look, I'll be honest, I follow the Matildas on social media, so obviously I'm seeing a lot more of their content. But I couldn't tell you who plays for the Socceroos. I don't know when their next tournament is. I know nothing about them. I don't know who their sponsor is. I know who is sponsoring the Matildas. But has this had an impact the other way on the Socceroos?
I think potentially, yes. And I'm sort of like 80% in the same boat as you are, where I remember the hype of the last World Cup with the Socceroos and people at Fed Square throwing flares, having a great time because we were doing so well. And then ever since then, I've sort of heard nothing. And I think at the moment they're doing World Cup qualifiers or Asian Cup qualifiers, one of the two. And I know they're nearly to the end of that, but that's all I know. I couldn't name a player, whereas I used to be able to name the whole Socceroos team because of the star names that, would be in your face on social media, would be broadcasted on TV, and everyone would get behind them and watch. But that recent insurgence of the Matildas has sort of, like you said, put that to the side, where I'm much more familiar with the Matildas team than the Socceroos team. We spoke 3 weeks ago about Matildas in the English Premier League, for example. And those are just some names on the top of my head that I can name, and I can't name that many people in the Socceroos team. And I think the complete buzz around the Matildas is that there's such a good, not just an Australian sports team, but an international sports team where they perform on the biggest stage. Everyone followed their most recent journey in the World Cup and the Olympics as well. And you are sort of seeing that following more than the Socceroos, which is something I think that is really impressive, and I guess that's what some people do want to see. It was that, we shouldn't have the Socceroos up here and then the Matildas down here. We shouldn't have AFLM up here and AFLW down here, we should support both as Australians, because that's what we all are, Australians. We're people that support our sports. We love our sports. And it's really refreshing to see that support go towards the Matildas, because they do us proud and everyone loves following them. And yeah, I think it's really like that support over the last 3-4 years is really a positive step in the right direction.
It'd be interesting though, like you're comparing apples and oranges in one regard, because you're talking about if we look at the men's team first, a mature team and then a lot of retirements. And now it's in a complete rebuild phase, where now with the Matildas, you've got a mature team at the peak of their powers.
Yep.
So the proof in the pudding will be 5 years from now when the Mary Fowlers will be running the show, but those older Ali Carpenters and the Sam Kerrs and the Mackenzies, etc., they'll retire, and then the question will be, is there what's coming through, and then that opens up the worries about the W League and the A League, or the men's A League and the women's A League, and the quality underneath there. So, but the point's right. I mean, you've got one team that doing everything right, and one team that's in a rebuild, and that'll be really interesting to see how that follows.
It would actually be really interesting to go down the street right now and quiz people on naming a player from the Matildas and naming a player from the Socceroos, because I literally couldn't name one player from the Socceroos. Just before we finish up, I'd love to get your thoughts, and this is something that Caro, who's not with us today, she'll hopefully be back next week. Caro's across this. She's done some work with the WNBL. But where is the WNBL? What's next for the WNBL? And should we be concerned? I mean, we've seen, obviously, the NBL, great success, and another product, I suppose, that was probably at that phase, Steve, 10 years ago where we thought it was dead. And then Larry comes along and he's basically rebuilt it from the ground up, and here we are now, and it's one of the most popular leagues in the country, and is obviously getting global attention for a variety of reasons. But talk to me about the WNBL. What's next? What do we need to be looking for? And should we be worried about the future of the WNBL?
Well, in class, we've been following this a little bit. So the WNBL, 1st of April, just gone. Basketball Australia handed over to control to a consortium of Larry and Robin Denholm. So Robin is the owner of Sydney Kings. She's also the chair of Tesla.
Yep.
So that happened, but at the same time, none of the clubs signed on initially. After there was a couple of deadlines about the clubs signing on, and the reason, watching the articles, was that by and large the clubs were losing collectively many millions of dollars, and yet the new licence deal asked them to invest in their stadiums, invest in the television quality and production facilities within their stadiums, and also asked them to forgo signage, so sponsorship rights. So then all of a sudden you've got clubs losing money, you've got the league now coming in and saying, well, if you want to be part of it, you've got to give away some of the revenue that you already had, and you've got to invest money that you don't have. So my understanding, and I was keen to, when we were having to talk to Hutchie in the next couple of weeks, we'll explore this, because he will have the inside knowledge, being an owner of at least one WNBL team and part owner in another one, is now that the clubs have signed, so it's now just wait and see as to what investment and what strategy that they will use to reconnect with the communities, because there's also been teams moved. The iconic Melbourne Boomers have gone to Geelong, and so there's disconnection between some of the fans and the teams now. So But the one thing they couldn't do was continue with what they were doing, because that was just destroying the game, it looked like, from the outside. So hopefully the new, there's reports that Larry's put in 50 million plus into the men's game. So what with the learning of 15 years on the men's side of building basketball audiences, what do they do with the women's, which is a different product, obviously, so it won't necessarily be the same strategy. It'll be really, really interesting. But, go back to the Matildas. We're a top 5 side in the world and have been for decade more. So I would suggest that it's a little bit like this army waiting to explode with support and passion and following, and we just got to give them that opportunity in a way that they want to follow, and not just assume that they will. So it'll be an interesting watch. That's what I'm thinking. Jordan, what do you reckon will happen?
I have to be honest, I'm not too familiar with Australian basketball, NBL or WNBL, but you've said in class, Larry Castleman is a big name, and he did have that huge turnaround with the NBL. So for him to be one of the key investors into this, I think it will be interesting, and it will certainly be something that I do follow, because anything could happen, and I think that could be a positive or a negative thing, but it is huge news for Australian sports, and it will also have a direct impact on AFLW because of those cross-code athletes. But like you said, with Larry Castleman, he's had that turnaround with the NBL. To bring it to the NBL would be good to see, and it will be interesting to watch just what happens, because look, anything could. And for the WNBL, which is a much more sort of cross area, I guess, in a way, where there's a lot of support coming from different areas rather than just metro. You're out to the suburbs, you're out, all over Australia, really. And I think it like you said, it will be interesting, because it could take them up. It could take them really high up with Larry's investment, but it could also have negative effects, which it'd be good to follow.
The other thing that'll be interesting to see what happens when you're talking about the race for the talented athletes is what's happening in American college sports at the moment, and now with a number of antitrust cases allowing or forcing colleges to pay their athletes, or certainly their football and basketball athletes. So you could see quite a lucrative financially lucrative college career coming now for Australian basketballers as well, starting in the fall, or our winter. So straight away, so that all of a sudden, that football, basketball type scenario, well, I'll have a crack at basketball, because I can make a lot of money if I'm a decent player in American college ball as well, which isn't an option here. So I think those things will play into it. And Larry has linked into the NBA unbelievably well, and American college, American agents, American systems. So whether that translates as well, but the college side of it will play a part for sure.
I was going to mention the explosion of the WNBA, and we talk a lot about the WNBA on the Crumbs. And we've seen the NBL do this pretty well, the link to the US. And, historically we've had big name players playing in the WNBA. And obviously Lauren Jackson, there was some, over the last couple of years, her coming out of retirement was big news, big publicity for the league, which didn't necessarily help them greatly. But obviously her going as part of the Opals to the Olympics got some extra coverage, I'm sure, for them too. But I'm just interested, there's some players over there, and I interviewed a couple of the girls who are playing with the LA Sparks this season. I'm wondering if there's some players who start to really perform and get get time on the court this season or over the next couple of seasons, if that has an impact and that becomes a way to help drive popularity over here. And sort of in a similar way, you've seen players like even Josh Giddey's posting on socials that he's watching the NBL and he's supporting teams. And so if we start to see that from some of our female basketball players, I think that could really, have an impact as well.
Yeah, I think for sure. And I mean, Josh Giddey's another example of that generational supporter, with his old man being Melbourne Tigers champion. And I think that's, if we circle right back to AFLW, you can't get a generational supporter without going through the generations.
Hard yards.
Well, it just takes time. And so 10 years down the track, we haven't even got through the first generation yet. And then you have the second generation, and you're almost doubling your supporter base.
Yeah.
So I think it's that make hay slowly, learn from our history, stay as connected as we can to our local communities. I mean, go back to, I'm not saying we should do this with women's football, but if you look at the history of men's football, there was recruiting zones. So the clubs were just so, they were allocated different parts of the state, and they saturated that space. You look at cricket, the Renegades and the Stars, they split the city. Which side? Stars on that side, Renegades to the west. And, they own regions and they immerse themselves in those regions to win the hearts and minds one person at a time, one family at a time. You can't throw money at that. You just got to stay in, and you've got to have a long-term vision. And to be fair, I don't think you be hearing the AFL be overly. I mean, they might be slightly disappointed or say they're disappointed, but same as GWS, they'll be in it for the long term, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the track. And what does it look like then? And then when you're 120 years down the track, 30 years, the first 30 years is nothing. If you're playing the long game.
Yep. It brings me, we're going to finish up in just a minute, but it's a great example. A friend of mine in Adelaide, female baseballer, about the same age as me, a little bit older, in her mid-40s, but she's got a little boy and he's 5, and she took him, the first few years of his life, he was going to watch baseball, and she played and she coached, and they turned up one night and there were men playing. And he said, "Mum, I didn't know men played baseball." And that's a sport where women are never really seen to... If you asked anyone about baseball, they're never mentioning women, well, most often. So I think you're right when you think about that. And you think about, we're sitting in a room here. There are 3 of us, and our producer is also a male. 2 males, female, talking about women's sport. And you guys love sport. You love sport. You love men's sport, women's sport. But I think that to me is really powerful. Women talking about women's sport is great, but men having conversations about women's sport to me is powerful. Even sitting here for half an hour with you guys who clearly have a great interest and passion and love for every sport, whether it's, Jordan will learn more about basketball, I'm sure, but footy, soccer, basketball, tennis, whatever we're talking about, it's having conversations and looping people in, and them understanding that women's sport's actually really cool. And a great friend of mine, Dee Anderson, who you guys spoke to a couple of weeks ago, said to me her vision for sport is that we just talk about sport. It's not men's sport, it's not women's sport, it's just sport. And, we're on our way, but long way to go, but we're on our way. But I've loved chatting with you guys today. I've loved you joining the Crumbs, Steve. I hope you can come back. When you come back, we'll have a proper rundown and a proper slideshow for you. But it's just been great to chat. And it's exciting. 111 days till the 10th season of the AFLW, and I'm sure Jordan and I will do a few shows on the AFLW leading into the season. But just to finish off, any final thoughts for you guys for today?
Oh, I think the stories of women's sport need to be told more as well. Like Brie Rizzo won the Stall gift off scratch. Hardly anyone does that on the weekend. You know, she was a surf lifesaver. Well, she's a runner, went to surf lifesaver, fell in love with surf lifesaving, goes back to running, doesn't like the track, gets convinced to go onto the track, makes the Olympics, meets her husband at Stall, wins the Stall gift off scratch. I mean that's a romance from a novel just there.
It's a movie.
It's, you know, this. I think what Australians love most is the stories. You know, yes, we can see the score and the match is one thing, but we love the stories, and I think that's the thing that's got to be told more, is the incredible stories of women's sport, because I mean, we're lucky, we get to hear them and talk to athletes all day, every day, and the stories are huge, and I think they need to be told. And the more we tell the stories, create the as you say, create the connections, build Ferris wheels into the activations, the more we kind of gravitate to those stories, those people, and then those performances. I kind of think it's in that order, to be honest. But
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think enough stories have been created in terms of up-and-coming women's sports, in terms of the WNBL, in terms of AFLW. And those stories don't just come from the players. They come from us, the supporters, the fans, the members. You know, like you just mentioned that story about the Stall winner, and I think that, you know, these stories need to be created by us. Like, not many people are going to know about her, but you've created that story on this podcast. Some people are going to listen to this podcast. Some of them are going to spread it to their friends. You know, it's up to us. It's up to us to, you know, talk about not just the future of the women's sports, not just the future of men's sports, but just what's happened in the present, what's happened in the past, what we think is going to happen in the future. And for people like us to spread the word, and that's where that connection, that engagement will come. Will not from the stories being told on the field, because there will be stories on the field from all women's sports, but the stories off the field as well are some of the most important, and it's important for us to spread stuff like that.
Nailed it. Great chat, guys. Thank you to all of you who've tuned in. Big thanks to Steve for joining us, and we'll see you again soon for episode 18.
thanks for having me.